All right, everyone. It's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. You never do know when I may just pop up with a live stream. So I am home for the night, and I decided that I wanted to talk college football with you. So hopefully you want to talk college football with me. The call-in number is 860-325-3687. I apologize that this live stream did not come with any kind of forewarning and notification. I just got home and decided to talk some college football. Last college football season, we did have a live stream schedule that we adhere to each and every week. And I will do my best to look at my schedule, my obligations, and what is best here for the channel, and try to commit starting with the college football season, starting at the beginning of September with week 1, with a schedule that we can stick to. And so you know where we're going to be, when we're going to be, and when we're going to be right here talking to you each and every week, hopefully multiple times per week. Of course, we've got our live streams on Wednesday night, each and every Wednesday night at 7, 8, and 9 o'clock with featuring Florida State, Ohio State, and Miami.
Decline.
All right, it's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who would be on the line? Somebody, they hung up. Somebody was on the line, they hung up. So what I'm going to do is, I had announced a couple weeks ago that I was going to march through the college football season week by week. More accurately, we are going to march through the college football season week by week. And
The call will start at the beat.
hey, it's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, it's George.
Hey, George, what's going on?
I just called you to talk about the landscape of college football.
We're going to talk about the landscape of college football. That sounds exciting.
Yeah. I don't like it. They're going to start selling beer to people in the stadium. That's wrong. That's just wrong.
Now, how firmly is your tongue planted in your cheek right now, George?
Well, you're supposed to drink in the parking lot like everybody else.
Okay.
What's up?
Keep that out of the stadium. Keep it in the parking lot where it belongs.
Smoke your weed in your car.
Okay. All right. So this is the landscape of college football.
Birthday, man. It's my birthday. I'm just messing with you.
Today's your birthday.
I'm 59. I made it.
Happy birthday, George.
I know.
And you're
I'm
going to
older than
spend
you, huh?
you're going to spend the remaining portion of your birthday. So I'm guessing your birthday was actually on Thursday. Correct?
Is it really changed days in the Eastern time zone already?
Oh, that's right. You're out west. You're out west there in Oregon.
I'm in
So it's still
Oregon.
Thursday. So it's still your birthday. Happy birthday. Happy
I still
number
got 2
59.
hours to enjoy it.
All right. And you decided to spend the rest of your birthday, the tail end of number 59 with us.
You've always been a very honest college football talk show guy. I'm worried about Miami. Do you think we can pull this off? Can we win this game? Can the Gators win?
Can you win? Now,
Yeah,
George,
'cause
you've
I'm
been
worried,
watching me. You've been watching me long enough to know what my response to that's going to be. That if you call as a Florida fan and say, "Can we win?" and then a Miami fan could call next and say, "Can we win?" Of course, you both can win. Of course, this is going to be
You know what scares me?
yes.
You know what scares me?
I
Missouri
truly
beat
don't.
us. Kentucky beat us. I'm like, don't fuck up against Miami, man. We'll be like the embarrassment of the nation losing to Miami. Their turnover chain.
You're concerned about that since you lost to Kentucky last year.
And Missouri, like 3 out of 5 years or something.
Well, they lost to worse teams than that.
I
They
got a lot
lost to
of faith
Duke
in
last
Mullen.
year. They lost to Duke. They
You know
should have lost to
something?
Florida
Touchdown
State.
Jerry Wilson. Yeah. God, I know that. I'm just saying, you get nervous when your team's really good. Like you hope they don't mess up.
Well, when your team's really good and you expect them to win every game, yes. I know what life is like. Then if they lose one game, it's a disaster.
Do you know what your reward is if you win the SEC East? You get to play Alabama. Isn't that great?
It's great if you want to get your butt kicked in.
I'm saying in a smart-ass, facetious way. Like,
I know you are. You have no other way.
Alabama. Yeah, isn't that great?
Somebody's going to beat them one of these years.
Alabama. You can lose to Alabama and go to the playoff if you play them close.
Yeah, it could happen. It could happen. It has yet to happen, but it could happen. You realize that none of the teams that have lost to Alabama in the SEC championship game have gone to the college football playoff. That hasn't happened yet.
It's close to happening, though. Like Georgia has an NFL offensive line. They're all going in the first round next year, I think.
In the first round, all 5 of them.
Yeah, all 5. I'm just joking, but they're pretty serious.
They're
pretty big.
They've got a good offensive line. Miami first, George. Focus on Miami first.
Do you know what I attribute my longevity and youthfulness to?
I can only imagine.
College football season.
The college football season.
Because every year when it ends, I know it's coming back. And that's what I live for. I'm like a flower. I blossom when the first game happens. Every year. It's my life cycle.
We all love college football. That's why we're here, even in June, talking college football with George.
I know the world will never end because there's no way college football season isn't happening. The powers of people will not let that happen. They love it too.
Well, you know what the countdown is, George. So what is it right now?
It's 57 days and a wake-up call.
57 days. 57 days until your beloved Gators are back on the field. And see, college football season is even kinder to you this year in that you have to wait one less week to see Florida play.
You know what's special about Miami? I know that during this game, there's going to be a couple plays that are going to get on a highlight reel, I love Miami. I just don't want them to beat us. I hope they win. I hope they beat Clemson. Just don't beat us, that's all.
All right, George. Your love for Miami is well noted.
Nothing else to say, man. I love you.
Happy birthday.
Support the college football. Thank you, man.
Thanks, George.
We'll do this again next year.
I am so glad I got to speak with you on your birthday. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, we'll do it again next year. I'll be 60.
Absolutely. That was the incomparable George, of course, and forever young. Forever young. At 59. At 59. I'm closing hard on that number, so I don't want to I will not be making fun of George's age. We wish George a happy birthday. George has the unofficial title of having commented to Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, more so than anybody. It's not even close.
Oh, we'll start it.
Hey, it's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hi, Mark. This is Anthony.
Hey, Anthony. How are you?
Hey, Mark. I have a question if you can answer this for me.
Okay.
Since Miami basically shares their stadium with a pro team, specifically the Dolphins and stuff like that.
Yes.
Do the college football rules with not allowing alcohol in the stadium apply even though it's a pro stadium?
It's an interesting question. So, obviously, different venues have different. So you asked the question.
The pro games, they sell the alcohol during the game.
Of course.
Inside the stadium, so that's why.
And so, what do you know about the current rules regarding alcohol being served at collegiate football games?
Can you bring, like, say you're drinking a beer in the tailgate before the game? Can you bring your alcoholic beverage inside the stadium, or would you have to throw it out and buy a beer from the stadium?
Okay.
And stuff like that.
point number one, Anthony, would be you're bringing this question to the worst possible source. I have no concern for any of that. It's not anything that I really track or follow. It has nothing to do with the game on the field. Number two, consider that people drink at NFL games. Concessions include alcohol sales. That is not the case and has not been currently up until now in collegiate football games. So you have answered your own question.
Okay, and with George, honestly, I'm the Gators are a little bit better because they're consistent and stuff like that with winning seasons. So as a Hurricanes fan, I'm worried about that game. We're gonna realistically, I think the game's gonna be close, but it's gonna be like 23-24 or something like that. 2 or 3 point game maybe, and Florida might win. But it's not going to be a blowout like what we had with LSU and stuff like that.
We don't think it. We don't think it's going to be a blowout. I would agree with you, Anthony. I believe that it's going to be a game that's going to be decided within one score. But each and every week during the college football season, there are games that appear on paper to be close, and that doesn't mean that the two teams aren't evenly matched, but if there are turnovers and one particular team gets on a roll and injuries, and just it turns out to be a particular team has just a much better day than the other team, that doesn't mean that week in, week out that they would be that much better. But on that particular day, LSU would not beat Miami 35-3, or I know that it was Miami scored some points and it finished whatever it was, 36-17, I think was the final score. Whatever it was, it doesn't matter what the final score was. It was 33-3 at one point in the fourth quarter. So LSU annihilated Miami last year. Those two teams would not play to that result if they would have played 10 more times. LSU was a better team last year, but they weren't beating the worst teams in the SEC as handily as they beat Miami. It just happened to be on that particular day, LSU played a much better game. So don't be shocked if one of these teams wins this game by 20 points. But at the same time, I do agree with you. Most likely, if these two teams lined up 10 times, Anthony, what do you think would happen the majority of times?
It would be a close game. It wouldn't be a blowout.
There you go. So it seems like you're following my point, is that if these two teams played 10 times, they would play 8 close games, most likely. And maybe the other 2 games would get out of hand. So there's a chance that we're going to see one of those 2 games. But most likely, we're going to see the 80% chance that it's going to be a close game.
And Mark, I have another question. If you can answer this for me, if you had to choose, like, if you had to choose a conference to be a commissioner for a day, which conference would it be, and what would you do to improve that conference play in football?
Oh boy, that is a great question. All right, so it's not difficult for me to choose that I would be the commissioner of the Big Ten. And I don't know if I could accomplish this in one day, because it would take just a Herculean effort to get this done. But the one football program that belongs in the Big Ten, playing football in the Big Ten based on geography, based on tradition and history and fit, would be Notre Dame. So I would do everything within my power to get Notre Dame to play in the Big Ten. Now, we're thinking very hypothetically here, and this is in La La Land.
Mine would be the SEC.
Okay.
And I would have the SEC. I'm a Miami fan. I would want to have all the Florida teams in the same conference. Have like Florida, Georgia, Miami, Florida State in the same conference and the same division, and Georgia Tech as well, and have all those, and Clemson too, in the big in the SEC and have them be in the same conference, and that would be honestly a pretty deep conference, having all Clemson and stuff like that. And it wouldn't be just top heavy. It would be down, up and down. It would be evenly matched. It would be parity. Won't you agree?
So, Anthony, I need you to clarify something for me. Are you talking about you would have all those teams play in the same conference, or would they even play in the same division?
No, Clemson would be in the same division as Alabama. And LSU. Miami would be in the same. Miami, Florida State, and Georgia Tech would be in the same division as Florida State, Florida, and Georgia, and have South Carolina be in the same division as Clemson. So it would be a lot easier to have an interstate rivalry with all the three teams in the same division. All the interstate teams in the same division. And
okay.
Stuff like that.
All right. How many teams are going to be playing in your conference?
The SEC?
Well, whatever conference you're going to call this, because it's got ACC teams and SEC teams. What's the name of your conference?
It's still the Southeastern Conference.
Okay.
Because you technically do have Southeastern teams. And
what is the purpose of doing this?
Because it would be realistically. Sorry.
All right, Anthony.
I don't like. Yeah, I'm sorry. I swallowed something by mistake. I don't like Miami having to travel up to Pittsburgh and stuff like that. It doesn't make sense for Miami to travel up to North Carolina and Duke. They would make more sense in the AAC conference with
All right, let's focus on your plan. Let's focus on your plan here, Anthony. Your purpose in doing all this is to keep Southern teams in the same conference.
Yes.
Is that it? Okay.
Yes.
So you're moving Clemson, Miami, and Florida State and Georgia Tech to the SEC.
Yes. And actually move. What's the other team? Having the other Florida, having UCF and USF in that same conference too. So keep all the Southern teams together in the same conference.
So you're moving Clemson, Florida State, Miami, Georgia Tech, UCF, and South Florida to the SEC. So you now have a 20-team conference.
Yes.
Seems a little excessive. Those teams are never going to see each other.
Louisville in the Big 12.
Okay,
they're closer to Texas.
Okay, let's focus on your SEC because you still have a lot of problems there. You have 20 teams in the SEC now, and you have, I think, 10 in the ACC. Is that acceptable?
Yeah, we moved those teams to the AAC conference.
Oh, okay.
Whatever teams are left. Duke and North Carolina go, and NC State go to the AAC conference. So does Pittsburgh and Boston College.
Okay.
Stuff like that.
All right. Well, it's quite a plan, Anthony. It's quite a plan. Do you yourself have a YouTube? Do I agree with it? I agree with portions of it. So a couple of years ago during the off season, I constructed a 6-conference format. So I basically built 6 12-team conferences, and I simply did this with the SEC. I moved out Texas A&M and Missouri and sent them back to the Big 12 where they belong, and I had 12 teams in the SEC. In the ACC, I took, similar to what you're suggesting there, I took the northern portion of the ACC, meaning Boston College, Pitt, Syracuse, Louisville, and I think they were the only 4. And I moved. No. They're fine where they are. Nothing speaks and reeks ACC more than North Carolina and Duke. I moved Boston College, Syracuse, Pitt, and Louisville to what I would construct as a Big East conference. And I did a whole lot of other things that people don't want to listen to right now. I'm not going to go on and on, but I formulated a college football world of Power 6 conferences, 12-team Power 6 conferences that made a whole lot of sense. The ACC was the current 14 teams minus the 4 teams I just mentioned. And then I brought in UCF and South Florida to the ACC, and they had a 12-team league. Everybody had a 12-team league that made complete sense.
It would make it even. Because the Pac-12 doesn't, the Pac-10 doesn't make sense to me.
Sure.
Or however,
Sure.
Colorado would make more sense in the Big 12, right? Or
I believe so.
In the Pac-12 better.
Colorado's more of a Big 12 school, certainly.
Okay, so, yeah, because that confused me. That sometimes that specifically doesn't make sense to me. And Utah should have stayed in the Mountain West, realistically. Or do you think they're fine in the Pac-12?
Well, based on their caliber of play, they certainly belong in the Pac-12. They just won a division championship last year, and they have no issue competing in the Pac-12. They're certainly capable of that.
Honestly, I like the confidence. Bring back the Big East, because I hated when that they disbanded. Basically, they have UConn. UConn is not really a Division I football caliber team. Honestly, they would be better in the Division II or something like that, and then have their basketball team stay Division I. Can you do that? Have 2 different?
Yes, it's been done.
How does that work out? How does that work? That confuses me sometimes.
How does it work? It's happened a number of times.
You have a Division I basketball team.
Villanova.
Division II.
Villanova, they play football, FCS football, and they play Division I basketball. There's tons of schools like that. Yeah. Anthony, I've got a line of calls coming in here. I appreciate the phone call and the suggestion. You have a great night.
Have a good.
Press 1 to start the call or 2 to.
It's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
This is Bash.
Hey, Bash, how are you? It's been a while.
Pretty good. It has been a while. How are you doing?
I am doing just fine. Don't get to too many of these live streams with the call-in show during the off season here, so it was nice to crank it up tonight.
Hey, it was perfect timing too, because I just got off work about an hour ago.
You and me.
So, I had one topic that I was going to talk about before the last caller, but just a little bit of a response to Anthony. First off, he was talking about this conference realignment stuff, and I just want to say that I'm always open for conference realignment in that discussion, because I've always thought that conferences should be more geographic. The fact that a team like Miami has to go to Pittsburgh, I see his point there. With that being said, it was pretty fun when I played NCAA Football 14 on back on the Xbox. I would just throw around conferences, make them geographic, make them balanced. Like the Sun Belt would actually be a solid conference, and then the Conference USA would actually be pretty good. So it's always fun to talk about that. With that being said, he brought up UConn. I think he's forgetting about the years Randy Edsall before he was brought back. His first time around when he had Dan Orlovsky, they weren't anything spectacular, but they were a pretty viable football team for a while, weren't they?
Sure, they were. So UConn, I'm not going to try to guess the years. It was around 2003, 2004, something in that range when they made the jump from FCS to
yeah, that sounds about right. Maybe it was 02, but
yeah, something in that range that they jumped up to big boy football, and it only took them a couple of years to become a viable to use your word, a viable program, meaning they were not an elite program or anything close to that. But considering they played in the Big East against like programs, and they certainly started to go to bowl games. And of course, it was all highlighted by going to the Fiesta Bowl after they won the Big East in 2008, I believe the season was. I might be off by one. No, Oklahoma went to the national championship game in 2008. 2010, might have been 2010 that they went to the Fiesta Bowl and played Oklahoma, lost by, I think, 48-17, if I remember correctly. But they won a Big East championship. I believe they went 8-5 that year and actually tied. It was a logjam at the top for the Big East championship. And the Big East, in my opinion, and I stated it a number of times at the time, the Big East did not belong as seat at the table with the other BCS conferences in getting a major bowl bid, and they would prove that over and over and over, aside from West Virginia being the only team that would survive from the Big East and actually compete in what we now have the New Year's Six bowl games. But yeah, UConn was a decent program. I would put it on at its peak during those 3 to 5 years under Randy Edsall. I would say UConn was Maryland. UConn was currently Kansas State. UConn was Cal. They were in that range.
Maybe even a good group of five comparison. They were pretty close to Cincinnati for a while.
Sure.
Except Cincinnati
Sure,
did have
absolutely.
a couple years where they were very good. I mean, this past year they had like what, 2 losses, I believe, in the regular
Yeah, they went 11-2. I was trying to find Power 5 teams that I would say, even though UConn had better records, had they played in the Big Ten or the ACC or certainly the SEC, they would not have been going 8-4, 7-5 every year. But yeah, they were not an embarrassment. They were a legitimate bowl team.
Which now, I mean, I can see why they can move back to the Big East for basketball, because like their football program has kind of fallen off since Edsall left for the first time, and then he came back and just hasn't been able to resurrect anything. They had the worst defense in FBS this past year, and I think they should stay FBS, but moving from the American is actually a very good move in my opinion. But joining the American in the first place, they kind of got lost in the shuffle trying to be about football and about basketball. You kind of can't do both. You got to commit to one or the other nowadays, because if you try to do both, you might have success in both, but at the end of the day, it won't be that lucrative going forward unless you are a Power 5 school like Kentucky, Duke, etc. But if like Villanova is a basketball school, they're not trying to be a football school.
Yeah.
Gonzaga is a basketball school. They don't even have a football program. Like you got to pick and choose if you're a smaller school like that.
Yeah, the distinction makes total sense, just because it depends on the school. But at that level, yes, Villanova, UConn, that size of school, with the limitations that they have financially and in regards to recruiting resources, and that choice is not to be a football school. The choice is to be a basketball school, because they have been basketball schools in the past, and you basically need 3 good players to be competitive in basketball, where you need 25 or 30 players on a roster that are really good players to be competitive in football. So it's obvious, and it costs so much less to run a competent, capable basketball program that's the choice to make.
Well put. The other topic that I was intending on talking about before the previous caller kind of talking about what he had to say was the same discussion that we've had before, this whole 8-team versus 4-team playoff. And I got to say, this case has to be made. You look at this 4 debate this year, you're talking about Ohio State, Oklahoma, and Georgia. You're talking about what ended up as the worst pass defense in the country, a 2-loss non-champ, and a team that lost to what ended up under 500, a 6-7 Purdue team by 29. So we're talking about number 4, which I'm fine with talking about 4 teams, because most years that 4th team is a pretty good option for the championship. This year it just happened to be 1, 2. I wouldn't even include Notre Dame. It was just clearly Alabama, Clemson, and then there was a huge gap. And
how do we know that there was a huge gap?
I mean, did you see Clemson, Notre Dame?
I'm not
Alabama.
disagreeing with you, but I'm also not agreeing with you. My point is that we don't have enough games and we don't have enough data to make that statement for sure. We saw Alabama play Oklahoma. We saw Clemson play Notre Dame. We didn't see either one of those two teams play Ohio State, and we didn't see them play a number of teams across the country. On a given, I could make all sorts of examples of two teams that didn't on a particular day seem as though that they belonged on the same field, but they clearly did. Did Michigan belong on the same field as Ohio State? That game was more of an annihilation than the two playoff games. And on top of that, Michigan played better than Ohio State the other 11 games of the season against like competition. So you don't entirely know what's going to happen in one particular day. So I'm taking from your example that you are in favor of a 4-team playoff.
Yeah, I am. And, I mean, it seems to have worked out most years. This year would have been perfect for a BCS championship.
I would argue that it's never worked out. I would argue that it's never worked out. I could go through each season since 2014 and explain exactly why it's never worked out.
Okay. There's quite a bit to unpack there. So, talking about this past year, and I would agree that more teams may have had access in past years, or may have been able to have access, but talking about this past year, I think a lot of people saw what happened between Alabama and Oklahoma and weren't surprised at all. They saw that kind of happening. Alabama would start out strong, 28-0 at that point, and then they would turn off the Jets and get ready for Clemson, and then Clemson would just walk all over Notre Dame like they did. It wasn't really close.
I totally agree.
I would say Ohio State honestly could have probably beat Alabama, just seeing Alabama in hindsight against Clemson. But you can't really talk in hindsight when, going to the selection show. Just seeing how Ohio State played the last 3 games, the Rose Bowl, the Big Ten Championship in Michigan, that team could have beat Alabama and frankly could have been competitive against Clemson. But if we want to talk about past years too, I still don't know if we really want to, you can make an argument about number 5, number 6, and back in 2015, even number 7, that 8th team, I feel like always isn't really a playoff team, a team worthy of access to a championship in this sport. Would you disagree with that?
I would disagree with that because we would need to go to an 8th team, and there's a number of objective factors that need to be considered over what has become predominantly an eyeball test for everyone. So what everyone does is they watch the playoffs, and then they make a conclusion about what should have happened and what should have been selected and if it made sense or didn't make sense. Well, we don't have that luxury. You need to come up with an objective system that works every year, not be a revisionist to say, oh, that didn't really work. We should have added 2 teams, or we should have subtracted 2 teams, or this particular, we would have never wanted to see that team in, so we shouldn't have 8 teams, or we should only have 6, or we should have 4. You can't knee-jerk react to any 1 or 2 or 3 particular scenarios or seasons. We have a situation in which teams are selected for a playoff. I don't believe in selection process. It should be an objective process in which the teams are selected based on results, just like the NFL, Major League Baseball, the NBA. We don't have a committee sitting in a room deciding for us who the 4 best teams in the NFL are.
Well, see, I don't necessarily disagree with you on that. With that being said, that can still be done with the 4. You can say, I mean, you got to lose. Okay. Okay. You got to lose less than the guys below you, and you got to win your conference. I think that's one main thing.
Okay, you got to win your conference.
Here is that, this debate is happening with teams that are not winning their conference, and that's meaning, guess what? Notre Dame join a conference. So that way we don't have this issue. And then, if Notre Dame joins a conference, assuming it's either the ACC or Big Ten, they would have already had to go up against Ohio State, or they would have already had to go up against Clemson.
Absolutely.
And it would have been set up perfectly. You can leave out one champion. Washington was clearly not deserving of a playoff spot. I mean, they wouldn't even got in if you talk about the top 8 teams getting in, unless it was automatic bids. There was no way they'd get in. And frankly, Ohio State kind of proved that they really didn't belong in a playoff. No, talking about Washington, you would have had 4 perfect teams right there, and not saying that the matchups would have been perfect, but just 4 teams, unarguably, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Oklahoma, no specific order, but those 4 teams, and there really wouldn't be any arguing. I mean, I can't think of a single year that we've had other than 2014 where you can make an argument for all 5 of the Power 5 winners to make it in. And 2014, too, was a mess because the Big 12 refused to claim Baylor as a champion despite them beating TCU head-to-head. And so they didn't have that one true champion. And as a result, there were 4 true conference champions, and those 4 advanced to the playoff. You get what I'm saying there? I know there's a lot to unpack.
Okay. I've had this argument probably about 4,207 times, as you can imagine. So, first of all, I'm in favor of an objective system. This is the worst sport to have a selection process, and prior to the playoff system in 2014, it was the worst possible sport to have the BCS implemented. The BCS belongs in Major League Baseball, if anything, and I've explained why in the past. And once I explain that, people understand what I'm talking about. You don't use a computer system for a sport that plays the fewest number of games against each other because the data is almost useless compared to a 162-game Major League Baseball schedule. Use the BCS over there. That's where it makes total sense.
That's very true.
So
100%.
Yeah, you're using a formula in which none of the participants played each other, and most of them didn't even play a team that played the other team. All right, so where do we start with this? My first conclusion is, again, I'm going to point to the NFL, and people don't like this at times because they are 2 different sports in a certain respect, but nobody complains or has an issue with a particular team emerging in the playoffs in the NFL and winning the championship, regardless of what their regular season record was, because they are assigned to a conference, to a division, and they won that division. And we've seen Super Bowl champions emerge that were 9-7 at the very worst. And so I don't have an issue with a legitimate conference champion, all of them being in the playoff, an 18 playoff, number one. I do understand what you're saying about this particular year. The Pac-12 was not worthy. Washington was not nearly as good as the other teams. I don't have an issue with that, as long as there is fair and an equitable arrangement in which every conference is represented. I can give you a number of years in which conference champions from the past would have never been considered for a playoff, and the only teams that proved during that season that they were on that particular day better than the conference champion were teams in their own conference. You know, Wisconsin won a conference with Russell Wilson at quarterback. They went 10-2. The only 2 teams that beat would Wisconsin have been considered for a playoff spot? Heck no. That was in 2011. But Wisconsin lost on a Hail Mary against Michigan State and a Hail Mary against Ohio State. So there was no team outside the Big Ten that proved that particular regular season that they were better than Wisconsin, but Wisconsin would have had no chance of playing in a playoff based on this selection process. So,
okay, but then I hate to interrupt you here, but you can also argue a year later that same Wisconsin team without Russell Wilson won the Big Ten. Only they were, I believe, like 8-5 or 7-6.
Okay.
Because Ohio State and Penn State, the top 2 teams in the division,
they won.
You're telling me,
in quotes, they won the Big Ten. Were they the best team in the Big Ten?
absolutely not.
No, they weren't the best team in the Big Ten. So Ohio State was the best team in the Big Ten. We could certainly come up with some type of a rule that would deal with circumstances such as that. I would have no issue with a 12-0 Ohio State team in 2012 playing in the college football playoff, representing the Big Ten. Okay. All right. So you made a statement about that you thought that the playoff system worked with 4 teams, but then you went on to note a number of issues that you had with it. One being this past season, Notre Dame being in the playoff. Number 2, saying that only conference champions should be in the playoff. But we've seen 3 examples of non-conference champions being selected for the playoff.
Okay, well, let me rephrase that entirely. I think what the committee has done in their job, and this is a personal opinion, a lot of people actually think that the committee has nailed it every single year. I'm not one of those people. I think the 4 is right. I just think they haven't gotten the 4 right in recent years. They really only got the 4 right one season, to be honest with you. And I think, honestly, that was 2014, where the only reason they got it right 100% in my book was just because of the Big 12's their refusal to claim a true champion. I covered that.
So Bash, let me interrupt you for just a second, because you need to explain something to me. I keep hearing this, and not just from you, from other people, that once the playoffs are played in the championship game, then people say, well, look, so-and-so won the championship and so-and-so finished second and so forth, and therefore the committee got it right. Well, none of the teams that were left out of the playoff got a chance to play in the playoff. I think we can all agree and understand, if we're thinking about this logically, is that I can select any 4 teams in the country and have them play a playoff, and one team's going to emerge as the champion. That doesn't mean that my selections were correct. Somebody has to win that format. Here's my 4 playoff teams: Kansas, Purdue, NC State, and Cal. I want those 4 teams to go play in a playoff, and somebody's going to emerge as the champion, and I'll say, well, that worked.
Well, I think that's a little different, because you can watch them on the field, and I think a lot of people have big consensus, other than 2017, who was the best team. 2014, a lot of people can see that, most people can see that Ohio State was the best team. 2015, Alabama. 2016, Clemson. The only year was Alabama in 2017, where a lot of people thought Ohio State should be in, and frankly, they got lucky against Georgia, and Georgia got lucky against Oklahoma. But those arguments are kind of the one-off basis that you were talking about earlier, and frankly, Alabama deserves the championship, for lack of a better term, in 2017. And in 2018, I think everyone knew Clemson was the best. You get what I'm saying here? Like, there's a huge consensus in college football that there wasn't a team outside of the top 4 that didn't make the playoffs that would have went on to win the championship.
And I am telling you that that's an easy conclusion to come to when those teams weren't given an opportunity to play football.
No, I'm not saying you're wrong necessarily. I'm just saying that there's really no evidence against that. And the system we have right now isn't. We can talk about how 8 teams would be better because it's going to allow more teams to make the playoff, but I don't really want to see Michigan again in 2018. I don't really want to see UCF without Mackenzie Milton in the playoff. I don't really want to see Georgia, who just lost to Alabama, and frankly, Texas destroyed in the bowl game. I don't care to see those guys again play for a national championship against the same teams that they got destroyed against or beat up against. Or frankly, Georgia had the playoff spot in their hand. They had it right there, and then they just threw it all away in similar fashion to where they threw the national championship away.
So what you're basically telling me there is that you were telling me that our eyes tell us, they don't lie to us, they tell us who the best teams are, and then you're turning around and telling me that actually Georgia was a better team than Alabama, even though they lost the game, but you wouldn't want to see them in a playoff.
I think that we can't really say that Georgia is going to go on and beat Alabama, considering the fact that just a day before the playoff was selected, Georgia got beat by Alabama in a fashion where they had the game in hand and they just blew it to a backup quarterback, again, Jalen Hurts. At that point, we're just thinking, well, those adjustments that Alabama made, the fourth quarter they dominated. Say they won't dominate the entirety of the game the next time.
All right. So the last thing I'm going to say about this is I'm going to summarize what's happened basically in the 5 years of the college football playoff. In year number 1, we had one undefeated champion, Florida State. We had 4 other teams make that, what was it? 5 other teams that all lost one game and had a share of or won a conference championship. Now, why Alabama and Oregon got a free pass as playoff participants in everyone's eyes, and it had to be some decision to be made between Ohio State, Baylor, and TCU, I have no idea, number one. Number two, that's the way the perception played out, and TCU and Baylor had just as good a season as Ohio State, and some would argue better, and they each lost one game. So we basically left 2 teams out that were just as deserving as 3 other teams that were allowed to play in the playoff. Okay, that's season number 1. Season number 2 in 2015, we later come to find out that the selection committee is charged to select the 4 best teams. Okay? They select the 4 best teams, but at the time, they were tied to conference championships. Therefore, they took a Michigan State team that lost to Nebraska. They took a Michigan State team. Yeah, they lost to a 5-7 Nebraska team. They beat an Iowa team at the wire at the Big Ten championship game. And they left out a team that I think now we would in based on the way the selection committee is selected, and Ohio State would have said, well, obviously that's a better team, but they lost head-to-head. But then the next year they went against that decision and went against the head-to-head matchup with Penn State and Ohio State. So in 2015, yeah.
Mind if I interject here real quick? Interesting stat about that Michigan State team, too, is they had 2 games on the road that they really boosted to the playoff. Was Ohio State, Michigan. Didn't lead with any time on the clock that entire time. Their first lead against Ohio State was as time expires, game-winning field goal. First lead against Michigan was as time expires, that fluky punt drop touchdown for Jalen Watts-Jackson. So that was actually very interesting.
So to be clear, I had no issue with Michigan State making the playoff because they won the Big Ten championship. So I had no issue with it, but I did not believe that they were one of the 4 best teams. So depending on how you look at it and this crazy selection process, I would not have selected Michigan State to make the playoff if somebody would have asked me who are the 4 best teams. But if somebody would have said who earned the spot in the playoff, I would have said, well, they beat Ohio State fair and square, head-to-head, went on to the Big Ten championship game, and won it, therefore they should be in the playoff. However, to your point, Michigan State did not necessarily beat Michigan. Anything else could have happened on that final play of the game, and Michigan State was basically, handed the football to run for a touchdown to win the game. 2015, you also had Alabama, and you had Clemson, and you had Oklahoma. What happened in the Pac-12 is Stanford lost 2 games and Oklahoma lost 1. So that was my big issue in 2015. Otherwise, it was pretty clear cut in regards to who should have been selected. Again, why a Stanford team that played at the time in a very difficult Pac-12 and lost on a last-second field goal to Notre Dame versus an Oklahoma team that played
No. They beat Notre Dame.
Oh, they beat Notre Dame.
Field goal in 2015.
Yeah, they knocked out Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Is that
that was a crazy game.
Again, we do this in no other sport where we're splitting hairs between wins and losses, and why there's some kind of magical separation between teams that lost 1 game and teams that lost 2, but there's no magical separation between teams that lost no games and 1 game. For some reason, people think it's deplorable to think that we could possibly have a playoff with teams that lost 2 games, but it's okay to have teams that lost 1 game in the playoff. It makes no sense to me.
Don't forget we had a BCS champion with 2 losses.
Sure. And we would have had a playoff team 2 years ago in Auburn had they won the SEC championship game.
Yeah.
So in 2016, obviously, we had the issue with Penn State and Ohio State. And Ohio State had a better resume. They had a better record, but Penn State won head-to-head, and Penn State won the Big Ten championship. So who do you take? Well, they took Ohio State. I would have taken Penn State, but I understand they were weighing resumes.
I would have taken both Ohio State and Penn State and kicked Washington to the curb because of that bad out of the conference schedule.
Yeah, that's true.
Their biggest game at home.
Yeah, by 2 touchdowns against USC.
Scores.
Yeah, very, very true. Very true. In 2017, we, of course, had the Ohio State, and USC doesn't even get included in the argument, but I would even argue USC, again, not based on eye test and results in terms of scores, but in regards to a conference championship with 2 losses, as Ohio State was with 2 losses. And I understand Alabama only lost 1 game, but they didn't even play in their conference championship game. So basically, losing to Auburn protected Alabama from losing and missing the playoff. And Ohio State clearly had. Now, I found it ironic in this particular year that the selection committee was pointing at Ohio State's bad loss, but not pointing at their quality wins against Alabama's lack of quality wins in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
And so
I mean,
the final point I make, the final point I'll make is that, and I've done a much better job in past arguments. I guess I've just grown a little bit weary of the argument. So I'm because I just think it's so obvious that this is the only better component to this system than the BCS is that it affords 2 worthy teams of an opportunity, 2 more than it did before. That's the only distinction in a positive manner that this playoff has over the BCS format. And again, if this selection committee did such a great job, then they would have a better track record than selecting. If they know the 4 best teams, then they must certainly know how to seed them. But they've only seeded them correctly once out of 5 years.
And they've never had a number 1 win the championship, too. That's another thing. Did you know that?
Oh, that's right. Alabama was number 1 this past year. I was thinking it was Clemson. Yeah. So yeah. So actually, I'll retract that and say 0 out of 5 years. So we're trusting the selection committee, and I don't think they do a horrible job. I just think they have an impossible job to do. And for the people that say, well, look at who won the championship, the selection committee got it right. Well, again, if they are selecting the 4 best teams and they are omniscient to do so, then they should be able to seed them correctly, and they have yet to do so.
All right. Well, you make very good points here, to be honest with you. And even though we don't agree on the number, I will say there's one thing we can agree on is it's an impossible job to really get the right team, specifically because of the small sample size in comparison to other sports and how the percentage of opponents on your schedule compared to the percentage of opponents on, like,
that's right, Bash.
The average NFL team schedule.
I don't want to miss another call here, so I'm going to let you go.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for calling.
Ahead.
I appreciate it.
Have a nice one.
Press 1 to start the call or 2 to decline.
All right. Hey, it's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, it's McD Sports 4.
MCD Sports 4. How are you?
I'm doing great right now. But the reason why I'm calling is actually not because of mail, and I'm calling kind of just to add to the conversation. I'm going to just say how to fix college football. The first thing you got to do is make the Big 12 have 12 teams. The 2 teams you add is Memphis and Boise State. What do you think about that?
Memphis and Boise State to the Big 12?
Correct.
And what is that going to correct?
With the what?
What is that going to correct? What's the problem?
That's going to. Well, the Big 12, I think part of the problem with the Big 12 is that they only have 10 teams.
Okay.
And I think some people look at them like oh, you kind of get like 3 or 4 easy wins every year. With 12 teams in a division, I don't think you get 3 or 4 easy wins in the division every year because all those teams play Kansas. I know Kansas State is down right now. Texas Tech is kind of down right now. Iowa State used to be pretty much a 4-18 year in and year out. So I think if you throw 12 teams in each, at least have 12 teams in each conference, I think that you could go ahead and I think it'll be kind of fair.
Okay. So what I like about your line of thinking is that you're bringing more interesting, competitive, noteworthy games to the conference. Memphis has been good in recent years, and Boise State's been good for about 15 years. I would be careful with Memphis, though, however, and I'm not even going to get into the money aspect or the recruiting aspect or the size of the stadium or the number of fans that they have or alumni base, because the Big 12 would not. I know that they considered, to a certain extent, Memphis this last go-around of possible expansion, but I don't know that Memphis is attractive enough. But we'll just stick to the football. Let's not get caught up in Memphis's recent success, because that football program has gone through year upon year upon year of 3-8, 2-9 type seasons. So I don't necessarily know if they have the sustainability to compete in a conference like the Big 12. That aside, I give some relevance and validation to your argument about upgrading the schedule, the conference schedule in the Big 12. But the flip side of that argument is that in conferences like the ACC and the SEC in particular, where you have 14 teams and you only have 8 conference games, it can be argued that the best teams in the conference don't play each other enough.
Well,
so at least if you play in the Big 12, you play everyone. No one is being missed in the conference. It is the purest championship of all the conference championships. It is the very purest because everyone plays everyone. I can tear apart, especially, again, the SEC and the ACC schedules, and I've already done it this offseason to show you where I will take a comparison of 2 teams in either one of those 2 conferences, and you can do it to a lesser extent in the Big 12 and the Pac-12, or the Big 10 in the Pac-12, but they play more games, and in the Pac-12's case, have a smaller pool. So it's not as much of an issue, but in the SEC and the ACC, it is. You miss 5 teams. Therefore, follow me here. You play everyone in your own division, as you know, in the ACC and the SEC, and then you play 2 opponents out of 7 in the other division. So to look at those opponents' records in conference, I ran through this a couple months ago during the offseason. There are teams in the SEC that will play 2 teams in the other division that went 13-3 last year. And they will be competing for a division championship against teams that will play 2 teams in the other division that went 3-13 the year before. How that is fair, I have no idea. Would you want your team? Would you want Maryland? Let's say Maryland was competing for a Big 10 East championship. And let's say I told you that the 2 teams that you were playing, I know that you play 3 in the Big 10 format, but the 2 teams that you play in the other division in the Big 10 West went 13-3 last year in conference play, and Ohio State's going to play 2 teams that went 3-13 last year. How is that fair or equitable? That's what's wrong with the ACC and the SEC schedules, and I have fixed them, but obviously I don't have that kind of influence right now.
Well, you kind of led into my second point. The second point I was going to make, that every conference plays 9 divisional games. That was going to be the second point I was going to make. So you kind of just stole my thunder there, but that's okay.
9 conference games.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that helps. It doesn't completely help.
Yeah.
I'll give you another example. In the Pac-12, they only have 12 teams, so you only have 11 possible opponents, and therefore you only miss 2. But last year, Utah was playing teams in the Pac-12 North that went 24-12, and Arizona was playing teams in the Pac-12 North that went 12-24. So again, I don't know how that's fair competition for a division championship when you're playing teams that went 24-12, and I'm playing teams that went 12-24 last year.
Yeah, but look what Utah did compared to Arizona.
So what's the result have to do with it? Well, just because they were, I understand they still won. I understand they still won, but it wasn't fair.
In Arizona, they didn't even make a bowl game, and they had 12-20, and they played teams with a 12-24 record.
What's that have to do? I don't understand your argument.
My argument is that the teams.
Yes, you're arguing it after the fact. I'm arguing it based on principle, based on fairness and objectivity. You're basing your argument on what already happened. I could make all sorts of arguments based on revisionist history of what stuff that already happened. You need to make, when you're building schedules and building a format in an organization in college football, you have to go on common sense. You can't go on history, because there is no history when you're building the format and the schedule. That's what you're doing. You're taking results that have already happened and then justifying your argument.
Were you talking about this upcoming year with Arizona and Utah are playing?
I'm talking about last season.
Okay, that's what I thought, because I thought for a second I understood you. Yeah, but I think my third and final point on how to change college football is, I know you're going to hate this.
Mm-hmm.
It's a 16 playoff format.
Yeah, we've already argued this. MCD Sports 4. I should find that clip, and I'll cut it out and make it a separate video, and it'll be starring you in your 16 playoff format. I thought I talked you out of that.
You talked me out of the Power 5, Group of 5, and FCS opponent scheduling. You talked me out of that.
I didn't talk you out of a 16 playoff and why it makes no sense.
I don't think you did.
Okay. I thought I took you through every year of the college football playoff and showed you how you would not be able to figure out which two teams deserve to bye every year, because they don't. They didn't do anything different than the other teams that made the playoff. They didn't do anything substantially different, excluding the teams that went undefeated. But that doesn't work out perfectly.
Yeah, you don't think this year they got this on last season they didn't get it correct?
MCD Sports 4, you can't base a system on what happened one year. You have to build a system that's going to be tried and true every year, regardless of what happens.
No, I'm just trying to get your opinion just based on last season.
Well, last season, I would have had to do something with Notre Dame. I have an issue with Notre Dame going to the college football playoff, having not won a conference championship or played a 13th game.
Okay.
And I didn't near the end of the season, because I thought this team's undefeated. They play a quality schedule, although the schedule wasn't as difficult as it should have been because of the likes of Virginia Tech and USC and Florida State were down. So it looked like a really good schedule on paper, and then 3 perennial top 15 to 25 teams were awful. And I'm just sitting there watching Clemson and Notre Dame play, and I'm thinking, this is a school where all of their collegiate athletic programs play in the ACC except for football. And if they played football in the ACC, this game would have been played last week, and not by a Pitt team that's 7-6. We would have seen Clemson and Notre Dame in the ACC championship game. One of them would have been eliminated, most likely Notre Dame. Therefore, we would have solved the Oklahoma-Ohio State issue, and we would have had a playoff with Clemson, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Ohio State, and it would have been nice and clean.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I think ACC. I think not ACC. I think Notre Dame should join the ACC altogether. I know they are in every other sport except football, and they have to play. And they play 5 games against the ACC or stuff, or stuff like that.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
So, yeah, I think it's ridiculous too. I do think Notre Dame should join the ACC. But what do you think of West Virginia possibly joining the ACC?
I'm going to make this comment to whomever's watching. We've got a number of people calling, and the next time somebody calls, I will answer the phone call. So I'm going to answer MCD Sports 4's question about West Virginia joining the ACC, but I will take the next call that comes in. All right, West Virginia and the ACC. From a football standpoint, I'm not going to go into the academics or anything else. I just look at football and look at geography and tradition and what makes sense. West Virginia would be a much better fit in the ACC or the Big Ten, but most notably the ACC than certainly the Big 12. All right, MCD Sports 4, I appreciate it.
Press 1 to start the call or 2 to...
All right, it's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who do we have on the line? Hey, it's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark Rogers. This is Alberto Sadler.
Alberto, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good, man. You know, just like the rest of these guys, I'm having those college football withdrawals. I'm willing to look at anything, watch anything related to college football. I just want to comment on the playoff system. I think the 4 teams are good. I think there should be a set of rules of qualifications, rather. For instance, last year with Ohio State and versus Oklahoma, I think you saw clearly in those last 3 games for Ohio State that their ceiling was higher for me because they had, the second rated offense right behind Oklahoma. But then you saw flashes of greatness from the defense too. You saw where the defense made some crazy Clemson, Alabama-like plays and stuff. And I just think they should value the ceiling more. And yeah, they had a really terrible game, but they didn't show up that game. I think, what I'm saying, they come to the playoff, they show up, and I don't know. I just think they should value their best.
So in all due respect, Alberto, how do you quantify that? How do you justify that in an argument and say they've got a better ceiling than they do, and I think we should reward that? Like, how is that in any way, shape, or form able to be measured?
I think maybe by looking at Oklahoma, or looking at Notre Dame. Like, I don't think they should have gone in. Like, they're barely beating teams, right? And I think Ohio State's best win during the regular season was better than Notre Dame's best win during the regular season.
You sure about that?
62 game against Michigan.
Yeah, what was Notre Dame's best win?
What was their best win?
Maybe against Michigan.
Yeah, that was the very first game of the season.
Okay, so they both beat Michigan.
I think games more towards the end of the season should mean more.
Okay. All right. No, I don't necessarily think that. I think they should all count the same, or we could come up with some kind of weighted system in which a team at the end of the year, we would say, okay, they're 11-1, but by the weighted system, they are, because they lost in week 3, that's going to count 0.3 points, but this team lost in week 7, so that's going to count against them 0.7 points. Yeah, I think that's a bit rigid, and I really don't know how to quantify that.
Well, teams typically do better towards the end of the season. Like Clemson had a few close games, and at the beginning of the season, barely beating Syracuse, almost losing to A&M. But then by the end of the season, they done peaked.
Okay.
And I think Ohio State was really peaking, man.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you. I could give you all sorts of examples of teams like 1982. Ohio State started 2-3. They won 7 games in a row. They were 9-3, and many people thought they had one of the very best teams in college football. Should they have made a playoff?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, 9-3. They should have been in the playoff?
No.
Okay.
no, not at all.
Then how do you?
Definitely not.
Well, they had won 7 games in a row.
That's true. They were the hottest team, but that doesn't mean they should have got in for sure, because 2 losses max. You know, you can't. That's why it's college football. Every game counts.
Okay. Why two losses? Why is that the magic number?
I don't think you can lose more than 2. It's just too much, because if you look at all the national championship teams, they're either undefeated or 1 loss. I think there's only been 1 2-loss team that won it all, right?
That's because nobody's been allowed to play in that game or in a playoff with more than 1 loss, except for that one LSU team. They've been the only team in history that's been allowed to play in a championship game with more than 1 loss. Therefore, we would have that. So that's easy. That's there's been no teams that have had 3 losses that have been selected to play. So we don't know if they could have won.
And just something else I wanted to say is I just want to give my prediction on Florida State's season this year. I think, you know how Auburn's the type of team that can go 5-7 one year and then go undefeated to a national title the next year, it seems like.
Sure,
I
they
think
did it
Florida
once.
State is just as capable as that. I think that they're going to shock. I think everything's just going to click, and everything's going to get better in every area. And I think they'll be 5-0 heading to Clemson, and I don't see them losing more than 2 games, probably to Clemson and Florida during the regular season.
Okay. I wouldn't be surprised if
throw
that
out
happened.
there. Go Noles.
Okay. All right, sir. I appreciate you joining.
Hey, thanks for answering my call, Mark.
Absolutely. Thanks for calling. I appreciate it.
You rock, man. Peace.
Thanks, man. We've got some good-natured phone calls here, so I certainly appreciate. I hate when I lose that screen and I can't put it on. Crud. Help me out here. Oh, I did it again. Here we go. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hello.
Hello, sir. What's going on tonight? Who am I speaking with? No one at the time being. All right, folks, I'm taking calls. What I wanted to get to, and you haven't let me get to it yet, was, as you can see, based on the title of the live stream, is it's 2019 Week 3 college football schedule and your predictions. So I announced a few weeks ago that I would be going through the entire schedule week by week, and you would make your predictions, and we would add up the standings and figure out who's going to win the college football championship this year. It's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, I actually got through. It's Lamar Stevens.
Hey, Lamar. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good. It's been a while.
I know it. What you been up to?
Just lurking and trolling and what I usually do.
Trolling. Okay.
But so I've got 3 directions I want to go. One direction is wanted to talk about the soft feud between the Big 12 and the SEC. About a Big 12 guy would probably say that an SEC teams, most SEC teams are kind of poor offenses. It makes their defenses look a little bit stronger. And then SEC guy would turn around and say that Big 12 teams offenses look stronger because they play bad defenses.
Yep.
And from my point of view, that's kind of a low-hanging fruit type of statement to make, just because the teams are to put those blanket statements on the conferences takes away from actually looking at each team and deciding whether or not this team actually does have a good offense and a bad defense. So or bad defense or vice versa. So looking at Texas and Georgia last year, or around New Year's, I'd actually say that Texas had a closet really good defense and nobody knew it.
Mm-hmm.
Would you would you agree with my general statement? You can't really just put those blanket statements over the conferences that way.
So I'll start with your last statement about Texas. The previous season, Texas, despite only going 7-6, had some outstanding defensive efforts. They held Baker Mayfield under 30 points. They only lost Oklahoma by 5. They took Oklahoma State and Mason Rudolph to overtime and only lost 13-10 in overtime to an Oklahoma State team that was putting up points on everyone. They faced Drew Lock in a bowl game, only gave up 16 points. Now, they did lose 3 or 4 substantial players from that team, including Malik Jefferson. But they came back last year, and they've recruited at an extremely high level the last 3 recruiting cycles, and I think we see it. So because of the style of play, yes, they gave up some points against some elite offenses like Oklahoma and West Virginia, but I would say that based on the offenses they faced, based on the talent on the field, and me watching Texas play 6 or 7 or 8 times last year, that Texas had one of the 20 or 25 best defenses in college football last year.
I'd actually say that Texas was more of an SEC team, like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
in the Webster's dictionary definition of an SEC team, than they were a Big 12 team. Because they had trouble with Texas Tech. They didn't beat Kansas by much. They a lot of times it seemed like Texas, when they scored a lot of points, ran into those bad defenses. And then, like, if you look at Texas's like their win totals and, like, you know, and their losses, you can kind of tell which teams had the good defense and the bad defense based on how Texas played them. Because yeah, there were certain games, certain teams where they had no business losing the game or having the game being close, where the game ended up being close. And it's like, that team must have had a good defense or something, because Texas didn't just cut through them like a hot knife through butter. But then a Texas guy would, you know, most of the time make that claim like, hey, our offense, we're part of the Big 12. We're going to score 1 million points. And it's like, you guys are.
So what is your assessment of the Big 12 and the SEC then?
I think most SEC, no, I'm not even going to say that anymore, because whenever I look at the SEC, I'm kind of jaded because, you know, I look at it from my side of the conference. I look at it from the SEC West side of the conference. And like I would say most SEC West teams would score comparable to a Big 12 team if they're playing against a Big 12 team. But, you know, when you play Tennessee or you play South Carolina or Missouri or something like that, then you get more of a, you know, it's not the SEC. It's not, you know, this big, you know, it's not the SEC like all 3 capital letters.
Yep.
It's more like lowercase SEC, if you would.
I follow you. I think the games last year during postseason play bared that out. When Vandy and Baylor played, they played a Big 12 style game, and so did Missouri and Oklahoma State.
Right. So yeah, I think it's just a misconception. You know, it'd be hard to stop saying or to stop going through with it, but it is a misconception. Like, you know, these SEC teams don't play good offense. You pick the right team, and they'll score a lot of points. Like Georgia scored with Oklahoma, and you know they hadn't scored that many points all season.
Mm-hmm.
But they played Oklahoma's kind of pace of, and I'm referring to you know, I guess what was it, 1 playoff ago. But yeah, they played Oklahoma's pace of offense, and like, you know, they played the game that way with Baker Mayfield. And that's, you know, it just depends on which team can dictate the flow of the game and, you know, how efficient the offense really is. And I will, like, you know, agree to like, yeah, some of those Big 12 offenses are very efficient passing the ball, because, or just offensively in general, like in Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, of course, West Virginia, maybe Baylor, maybe Texas Tech. And I think that might be all of them, where they play offense so efficiently because that's how they play football. Like if they're not hitting on all cylinders fast and ball, then they're probably gonna get blown out.
Well, ever since Trevon Boykin left at TCU, they've been a bit of an aberration in the conference in which they've been dominated on the defensive side of the ball and have had pretty marginal offenses and then a pretty pitiful offense last year. And Kansas State would be the other example where they have not had a prolific passing game in forever, if ever, even under Bill Snyder. Even when they had their best teams with Colin Klein at quarterback, they were running teams. They had running quarterbacks. And they have in recent years with Alex Delton and other quarterbacks there at K-State. So K-State and TCU have played a little bit different brand of Big 12 football. And Iowa State, since they've been good to a certain extent, they've had arguably the best defense in the conference and have had relied on the running game with David Montgomery.
Right. So, that's one side of the conversation. On to another side, I wanted to look at Georgia and just talk about how Georgia today is in the same place that LSU was in, roughly 10 years ago. And, we're all putting Georgia on the same pedestal with Alabama and Clemson.
Mm-hmm.
And, saying they're like, head and shoulders above the rest of the pack. Alabama, Clemson, maybe Oklahoma. And, yeah, maybe Ohio State also.
Yep.
And I venture to say that, no, they're still in that second tier. They're still in that second tier with the others. Yeah, they're at the top of that second tier, sure, with your Texases and Texas just recently beat them. But with your Texases and I don't know who else is in that tier. I guess nobody in ACC is in that tier. They just
no, you got to go down about 4 tiers to get to the next ACC team. It was pretty bad last year.
Poor guys. But yeah, and several other SEC West teams. But and I say that because they lost to Texas, they lost to LSU, they lost to Auburn. They keep proving that they don't play at that same consistency, that consistent quality that your Ohio States, your obviously lost to Purdue. I don't know. I'm going to put that in there. Your Ohio States and your Alabamas, your Clemsons, to that standard. There's a standard play where it's like, okay, eventually Alabama's going to pull away, or eventually Clemson's going to pull away, and it's not going to be a close game. In Georgia, I think because of the SEC, East, a lot of those teams are lowercase SEC. Kentucky had a good season, and Florida had a good season, but those teams they're not as consistent as they should be, or they could be. They want to be. Let's put it that way.
Lamar, I think we should consider, though, that prior to Clemson waxing Alabama in the championship game, Alabama obviously was the 17 champion, and they had run the table thus far in 18. And Georgia was the one team that over that 2-year stretch basically outplayed them. Sure, they lost, but they lost in overtime after leading by 13 points, and they lost an SEC championship game by a touchdown in a game that they were leading by 2 touchdowns, to where Georgia was showing us that they were going up against what we most believed to be the best team in college football, and was in 17 and nearly was in 18. And they played them better than anybody over the course of 26 or 27 games. So I think that's where a lot of that perception came from, was Georgia actually getting on the field and going toe-to-toe with Alabama when nobody else could. Auburn, LSU, Mississippi State, everybody was getting just trounced by Bama the last 2 years, and Georgia was able to not just play them to the wire, but actually give us the thought that, they blew these games. They were outplaying Alabama, and I think that, and looking at recruiting rankings and seeing Georgia at the top or in the number 2 position the last 3 years has caused people to believe Georgia is where Alabama and Clemson are.
And I still gotta say no, because I've seen LSU there as well. Not recently, but in 2011 and 2012, 2013. There were some very close LSU Alabama games, and I just want to caution Georgia. Like, as time goes by, being close is not going to cut it anymore. Like, it will solidify, like, Georgia being in the second tier. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's a point to
LSU
be
has
made about
up to-
Georgia and Michigan that if they don't seize the opportunity, and we've seen both of these teams get close to what has been the giant in the conference, Alabama and Ohio State, but they can't get it done, that opportunity might slip away and the giant may continue to be the giant, and Michigan and Georgia may slump back into, again, not the abyss, but back into that kind of 9-3 kind of program, and have missed their opportunity when they had the players to do it.
All right. Now, the last thing I want to touch on is I've come around on the expansion of the playoff. I used to disagree with it just because I felt like it would dilute the regular season.
But you watched plenty of Mark Rogers TV,
season,
is what you did, Lamar.
Absolutely. That done conversation that was right where I was going. No, I'm more hard-headed than that. But still, I've come around because I feel like the regular season's already kind of diluted. I've heard some conversations about a 10-win season not really being what it used to mean. In the 90s and early 2000s, because the extra games that teams add are usually lower tier games. So if you take away the two FBS level games that teams pad their schedules with, mainly SEC teams, they'll pad their schedule with two subpar games, and you take away the conference championship games, and you take the two top teams in a conference. Yeah, in every Power 5 conference, you take the two top teams, which gives you 10 teams. And then, and I'm going to go to 16 teams. You take maybe two group of 5 teams, which gets you to 12. And then you can choose 4 bubble teams, if you would, and you come up with a myriad of reasons to pick these teams, maybe just based off the rankings. You pick four bubble teams and fill out your 16-team bracket. I think that would give us the about the same amount of football. The regular season would still be pretty relevant, and you still end the season around the same time and get a more clear-cut answer to who the champion is.
So you are delving down into the FCS ranks to select playoff teams?
No, group of 5.
Oh, group of 5.
We're removing the FCS. We're removing all the cupcake games, and also taking away the conference championships. We're making kind of interconference championships, if you would, without playoff.
Okay, 16 teams. What I love about any playoff format that exceeds 8 teams, either 8 or 16, is that every conference is represented. I just believe that that's paramount. I don't care what we think about a particular conference. There's a reason we have conferences, and there are teams vying for championships in those conferences. Otherwise, let's not have conferences. Let's just number the teams 1 through 130 and throw their schedules into a randomizer, and then pull out the schedule that everybody should play.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I like having 16. I like having the two teams from each conference represented, except for the group of 5. Maybe they can have 2 teams. No, because there's so many group of 5 conferences. There'd have to be a way for them to get for us to select the 2 teams from the group of 5. And I think most of the time it kind of sorts itself out. You can kind of tell which teams are better than the usual group of 5 team and which are normal. But yeah, I like having all the conferences represented. with more than one team, because it helps those arguments. Like, it's fun to have those arguments of which conference is stronger and which is, which one's not as strong at that point in time. I don't want to lose that.
All right, Lamar, I appreciate the phone call. The one phrase in all of that I'll let you get by on that I normally wouldn't, but I'm a little bit bleary-eyed at this time of night is that it's all going to work itself out. I've always confronted that comment because I don't agree with that, but I appreciate the phone call and the support.
Absolutely. Have a good night.
All right, Lamar, have a good one. All right, so what I aim to do here, listen up, everyone. I'm going to read through the Week 3 schedule. And if you would like to select the winners of the games, you don't have to select every game. You can select whatever games you want. And you certainly can select the winner of every game. But I'm going to read the schedule for Week 3 of 2019, all the Power 5 games, and all the meaningful, what we would consider to be impactful group of 5 games. So here we go. Do not place your winners in the live chat. Place your winners and your comments on who's going to win the games, your predictions in the comments section. Now, I don't know. Somebody's going to have to let me know if you can do that while the live stream is going. I don't know if you can comment in the comments section while the live stream's going, but please do so. All right. Here we go. Week 3. Here are your games. Friday night, North Carolina at Wake Forest. Kansas at Boston College. Washington State versus Houston. That's a pretty good Friday night there. I'm going to watch some football. North Carolina at Wake, Kansas at Boston College, and Washington State versus Houston. We also have, and again, I don't expect you to catch all these or predict all these. It might be a little bit easier. So our first 2 videos, I actually pre-recorded the videos and I scrolled the schedule so you could play along and make your selections. Of course, I don't have that opportunity here going live. So you're just going to have to listen to me. All right. The games on Saturday include Pitt at Penn State, Chattanooga at Tennessee, Arkansas State at Georgia, Kansas State at Mississippi State. Of course, the Bulldogs won the game in Manhattan last year, 31-10. Furman at Virginia Tech. We've got a nice little matchup with NC State going to West Virginia. Eastern Michigan at Illinois. Ohio State opens up Big Ten play at Indiana. Maryland at Temple, where the Terps were drubbed by the Owls last year. The Citadel goes to Georgia Tech. You've got Air Force at Colorado. Those 2 teams should play. I like that matchup. Both teams obviously playing in Colorado. We also have in Week 3, New Mexico at Notre Dame. We have Memphis at South Alabama. We've got Stanford at UCF. That's one of my favorite non-conference games this coming season. Stanford at UCF. USC at BYU. Georgia Southern at Minnesota. UNLV at Northwestern. UNLV at Northwestern. Alabama at South Carolina. The last time the Tide went to South Carolina, they lost in 2010 as defending national champions. Oklahoma State at Tulsa. Southeast Louisiana's at Ole Miss. Colorado State's at Arkansas. And, of course, the Rams put a hurting on the Hogs at Fort Collins last year. This time the game's played at Arkansas. Iowa at Iowa State. That's been an entertaining game as of late. Arizona State at Michigan State. Of course, Sparty was upset at Arizona State last year, and now the Sun Devils make the return trip to East Lansing to take on Michigan State. Louisville at Western Kentucky. Bethune-Cookman at Miami. North Texas at Cal. We've got Idaho State at Utah. Cal Poly at Oregon State. We've got Duke at Middle Tennessee. Kent State at Auburn. Florida at Kentucky. Of course, the Wildcats ended that long 34-game losing streak to the Gators in Gainesville last year. Florida makes the return trip to Lexington this year. Lamar at Texas A&M. TCU at Purdue. Nice little under-the-radar non-conference affair. Florida State at Virginia. Key game in the ACC, possibly. Clemson at Syracuse. Maybe the only chance that Clemson could possibly lose in 2019. They, of course, play Texas A&M at home, and they've got Florida State, I believe, at home as well. Clemson at Syracuse. Hawaii at Washington. Northern Illinois at Nebraska. Texas at Rice. Oklahoma going to the Rose Bowl to take on UCLA. Texas Tech at Arizona. And finally, we've got Oregon hosting Montana. Those are your games in week 3. All right, so there we have it. So if you would like to continue to I might have bit off more than I can chew, but we're going to march through the schedule in 2019. Considering that I'm doing schedule rankings, I haven't finished those. I'm up to about number 24 out of my 70, all the way up to number 1 rankings. So I've got to finish schedule rankings and record projections, and what is started out as my spring record projections and not my final predictions has now made its way almost to July, and I'm still doing record projections along with my schedule rankings. Position previews. I've got Notre Dame, Nebraska, and Boston College coming up in the next few days. So if you're keeping track of that, we've done position previews on Georgia, Florida, Kentucky, Auburn, Alabama, LSU, Ole Miss, Clemson, Miami, Pitt. We'll do Florida State. We got Boston College coming up. We got Notre Dame and Nebraska coming up, as I mentioned. Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, TCU, Oklahoma, Texas, USC, UCLA, Washington, UCF. And recruiting updates. We've got plenty of those that we've released in recent days, specifically from Washington, Ohio State, Georgia, and some others. All right. We've got 16 on the line. I want you to bear with me for just a second and listen up. What we've got available is what we were calling the Voice of College Football Community. And the link is down in the description section below. And so what you get there is I come in live twice a week. And in one of the live streams, I respond to your YouTube comments, which I've received over 40,000 this year. So thank you. And in the other video, the other live stream, I bring you on to talk college football with me. So I think it's a great opportunity to build the channel. I would love to do this full time. I would love to do this all the time. So this is what was suggested and requested this week of me. So most of you know that on Wednesday night, we do a Florida State live show at 7, Miami at 8, and then Ohio State live at 9. I had requests this week to add LSU, Clemson, Michigan, and Florida. The problem with that is that can't be sustained. We just don't have enough hours in the week. Even though I'm pumping out about 50 hours here, in addition to the 50 hours on the regular job. So the dream, the vision is to do this all the time, full throttle, full time, all the time. Top-notch production equipment and effects and graphics and everything included, and to do it upright, to sell it, to market it, to do it up the right way. Again, that's the dream, that's the vision, that's what we want to do, and we would love to get your help. You have a number of opportunities to help us, starting with liking the videos, also including sharing the videos, getting those videos out on social media, inviting your family, your friends, your social media acquaintances. Let them know we're here. Also, of course, subscribe. And I'm guessing with 18 people watching right now, you're all subscribed. I would hope that you're all part of what we do here. And then in addition to that, again, consider what you spend on coffee. Consider what you spend. Consider the money you just lose every month and throw us a buck or two. Consider if everyone would do that with almost 11,000 subscribers. Could we do this full time? Absolutely. And you have another opportunity to invest in what we consider to be, on a regular basis, every day, the best discussion, debate, and analysis of college football right here. So you can help us on the Super Chat. You can also help us by joining our Voice of College Football community. Again, grab the link in the description section below. All right, everyone. I apologize for not checking out the live stream. Obviously, everyone was calling in, and I was not able to jump on the live chat and see what's going on. But I see Reasonable Gump on the live chat, so it's good to see you. Skankopotamus is there as well. Big Bubble Blue, Brody, and Yassith. Sorry if I botched that up. And our last comment from Luigi Green 843. This is the first time I've seen your handle here, so you know what that means, everyone. Luigi Green 843. Welcome to Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. So we would love to know how long you've been watching and who you root for. And of course, not that I don't have already way too much to do in trying to get you set, me set, all of us set for 2019. We've got SEC Media Days and all the Power 5 Conference Media Days coming up in just a few weeks. So once that starts, look out, man. Alberto, thanks for calling. So that was you. Thank you. But I've never seen your handle in the live chat or on any comments. So once Media Days hits, then forget it. Then I have way too much to do. I have way too much to do as it is. So believe me, in addition to what we deliver here in regards to content, and that's all that you see, that's all you need to see or need to care about. But to make this sustainable and to have it grow, I'm actually doing more these days behind the scenes in trying to leverage marketing and sales opportunities and to learn more about that and to contact people and to get people on my side. And I've had a number of great people who have come out of nowhere virtually to help me in recent weeks with that end of it. So that's not something you guys need to be concerned with, but just understand that in addition to all the time that I put into the live shows and the live streams and the recorded segments with the guests that we have on, plus the analysis from myself and the zillions of videos that we pump out each and every month, it's about 150 per month. That in addition to that, I've actually been putting more time into the sales and marketing process of trying to make this sustainable long-term off camera. So I would appreciate your support. If you love college football, this is the place to be. And please, when you come across people out in social media and otherwise, and they're obviously college football fans, let them know we're here. If you had anything in the live chat that you really want me to address, please copy and paste that comment or question and just leave it in one of the video's comments section, and I can respond to it. Although, of course, as I just explained, at the Voice of College Football community in the description section below link, that's where you can get our reaction to all of your YouTube comments right there. All right. I'm running on fumes. I hope you guys have a great night. We will see you very soon right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football.